Anybody have a question for our panelists?
I know it was talked about how I guess people almost throw things into algorithms without actually like understanding concepts. There was a documentary on Netflix, I think a few years ago, on like specifically like policing racial bias with AI. So would you suggest that
Cognitive bias?
yeah, it was like in the policing systems they were starting to use AI technology, and then what that ended up causing was like racial bias because it was specifically made by white men, so then it wasn't properly detecting, obviously, people of color. Um, and so would you suggest that people that are, you know, not involved in AI development or algorithms get involved in their development, for example, experts in criminal justice systems, psychology, sociology, almost similar to many of you, and do you have suggestions on how those people would get involved?
Absolutely. So as someone who's written some of these systems, right, you want lots of voices in. You want people who can think about things in a different way, who come at the problem with a different lens of view, who can say, hey, Bruce, you forgot about this. Think about this other issue. Think about the effects that this might have, not just about solving the problem, but what's the larger issue you're trying to address, and does it actually advance the larger good, right? The more voices that get into that system early on, the better. It doesn't do any good to be there late. Late to the game, the system's already out, and like Compass, it's already polluting the waters. You want to get in there early, so that means paying attention. That means being active. That means understanding the decisions that get made at the most local level, oftentimes about what kinds of systems is the. Well, you brought up a question about the policing. What are the police forces thinking? What is the city council thinking about? Are they going to make an investment in trying to purchase some of these larger AI systems to track devices or whatever else, right? And then think hard about, is that really a good thing? Does that really advance the good of society generally, and be heard? Absolutely.
Oh, hi. Can everybody hear me? Sorry. Hi. I'm so excited to be here, I have to say. I'm a professor at UB in the Department of History, and I'm currently here on behalf of my students. I'm teaching and spearheading an innovative project that's bringing students together to solve the problem of white supremacy from working together across a computer science class and machine learning and a history class on the history of white supremacy. So you'll forgive me. My question, you may have answered it in the answer to David's question, but I still think it's worth asking. So I'm sort of carrying my students with me. At the beginning, Bruce and Mark, you sort of made pains to talk about technology sort of not being good or bad. And I kept thinking, and I know this is evident to everyone in the room, but that the question is moot, right? That the future without technology is unimaginable. And so it's about what kind of future with technology and sort of what kind of cyborgian experience we are going to have. And so this brings me to a more specific question about white supremacy, kind of building on the early discussions of chatbots and so forth, learning on these large language models. And so the question is a bit about data. It's going to sound really simple, but is there simply more supremacist, violent, racist language out there that is being scraped? Or are there other reasons that this particular data becomes visible? I'm thinking about what Yasmina said, and I'm quoting you here, about the darkest corners of the internet, right? Why are those corners being given light? In other words, why is Tay not obsessively talking about love, care, and justice? Or is this really evidence of a deeper structural white supremacy that we're looking at here? Just as a slight tangent, on NPR yesterday, they were talking about these white supremacists that were projecting swastikas on massive buildings, right? In an attempt to project power, but also desensitize the public. That reminds me of the Buffalo shooter's actions, live streaming his killing, right? And so I just keep thinking, is there a strategy here? And so my third part of my question is, how do we resist from our new cyborgian stance? And of course, I'm aware of BLM and all the groups, oppositional groups that are using digital space critically. But I guess my sort of desperate question is, why are we losing? Or why aren't we winning? And so, Yasmin, I just want to say your last slides, which I also took a picture of for my students, were really, really inspiring, as were some of the comments here that I jotted down in response to David's question. So just thank you for a great panel.
Do you want to take it?
Thank you so much for this really important question. And I'm really happy to hear that there are initiatives like this at UB, because certainly that's what I started out by saying, was that the only way to transcend these problems is to have everyone in the room. And so hearing that there are historians that work side by side with computer scientists really makes me hopeful for the future. To your question, I think there's many ways to answer it, but I want to continue the conversation from the previous question about this idea of collecting it all, because I think part of it is this mentality. Why the darkest corners of the internet? Simply because it's there, it's available. And because we have this rationale in computer science that more is better, more data is better, usually people err on the side of collecting everything they can and thinking about how to filter out things that are not really good later on. So this is one aspect. And then the other aspect is that knowing what's going on Reddit, for example, in certain white supremacist and in toxic masculinity corners of that space in particular, I think we can nowadays talk about a distributed form of misogyny, distributed forms of white supremacy, meaning there are places on the internet, where pockets really, where this discourse is encouraged, where our young people are drawn to if they don't know better. And this is where I think education becomes very important, to have these difficult conversations in class so that we don't mass produce mass shooters. I presented related work a few months ago, and when I drew a straight line from these toxic communities on Twitch, on Reddit, specifically in the Buffalo case, I was corrected by someone on the panel who said, it's really a huge leap to make this connection between, the radicalization of this person and his participation in these online forums. Well, I'm sorry to say, but it's not. And this is what the investigative report uncovered later on, that this is where the radicalization took place, right? It took place on the internet. I recently watched a documentary about Andrew Tate that also similarly talked about the danger of how people like this don't just propagate this propaganda within their own networks. They create networks that are self-propagating, that are built, again, based on profitability. The idea that more clicks, more views directly translate in our current economic system into more dollars directly going to the creator of this content. So from that documentary, I learned that his personal economic model was to encourage his followers to put out videos of him and act as this kind of a marketing pyramid, that grows seemingly organically, his community, his fan base, to the millions of, followers, when in fact it may have started with just a core of, let's say, 100 or 500 people that were listening to this word vomit. But unfortunately, that's how distributed masculinity and distributed white supremacy work nowadays.
With distributed capital, right? Yes. Digital capitalism, because it's interconnected. And in my short stint on Facebook, until I was excluded on the basis of the charge that I never could dispute, that I impersonate Eva Jarek, so I noticed that things that get so much more attention and people talk about are not about tweets about well-being and flourishing, and it's either extremist view or anger about extremist view, and it's most what engages us and what retweets us and what gives us followers and popularity machines. So how to go to some of the things, how to go to depopularizing as a descaling as a attractive idea that stands for social engagement and social good rather than buying followers and so forth. I mean, because I noticed even like the most radical feminist views that got most attention were when they were attacking somebody else and not like constructive retweets about how do we solve this problem, right? So that's a game to be built.
Yeah, just briefly, I mean, I think it's interesting to be able to come full circle in a way to what David started off with, this notion of profit, because, you know, building on what both of you were just saying, one thing that we know is that research has shown that, you know, falsehoods spread 8 times as quickly online than factual statements. And so why is that? A bot, for example, you know, will spread truths and falsehoods equally. It's equally adept at doing that, right? But what happens is when people are triggered by content which is extreme or somehow gets their emotions rising, they're more engaged. These platforms are designed around engagement. The longer and more continuously you can keep people engaged with your service, the better your revenue is going to be. It's a very simple algorithm in that respect. So when people dig in and double down, and this applies to especially to mis and disinformation, it's because they're having an affective response to the content that they're consuming. And we know that we're much quicker to respond to affective content than the cognitive cycles it takes to reason about something that we're being presented.
Just one very small, there has been some talk, and I think it's a good idea, of bringing in the sphere of internet public broadcasting idea. Has been suggested numerous times, so it's not just commercial enterprise, not for profit. So PBS internet, something like that, better.
There's a question over there.
Yeah, hello. I just love everything you all have said. Thank you so much. I am also from UB. I'm a librarian by trade, and I also teach the first year seminar, and it's on framing your digital identity in the age of big tech. And so what I do with the students is I introduce them to 5 areas of their digital identity they didn't realize they even had. And part of it is on predictive analytics and predictive behavior. So I have them go into the seamier side of comments and tell me about the people commenting with the story, and can they predict the type of person they are and why they do that from a corporate standpoint, that business is driving everything. So it's very eye-opening to them because they don't think about it. But what's really interesting to me is they don't really care they're being surveilled. At the end of the day, it's convenience, and they don't really care. They're now dated, but there's 2 films I have them watch: The Black Code, which might be one that they were alluding to, and that's about surveillance. And there is some very good examples in that with Brazil and how they actually freed a man who was imprisoned based on the different tweets and things that they had seen at the scene that actually freed him. And the other one is, because I'm a librarian, Google and the world's brain. So Google is where I'm coming to at this point. because Google is tracking everything you do. It's keeping all of your emails, it's keeping all of your GPS. It's not listening to you like everybody thinks and wants to say that your phone is on and it's listening. It's grabbing all those data points. And what I'm wondering for you all is like, how concerned are you that, okay, you've got Microsoft, you've got the ChatGPT, you've got others, but that Google says they have they have a chat version. They haven't released it because they were afraid of the litigation if it gets a wrong answer or you know, what your earlier examples. But I think it has a whole lot more in terms of being able to try and predict what somebody may or may not do based on the unfathomable amount of data they gather around the world. And Android phones across the globe is the #1 phone.
So very quickly, one of the misconceptions that a lot of people have is that there is a real difference between the types of algorithms that run social media sites and the types of algorithms that run search engines. The fact of the matter, I think, as Mark and Jasmine and others have said here, is that they are trained to do the same thing, which is generate profits. On the basis of that, you know, as it one of the renegade engineers that came out with the social what is it, the social media the social media movie, the documentary,
Social network.
The Social Dilemma. Yeah. So one of those renegade engineers, I think a previous, yes, Harris, I believe, a previous Facebook engineer, put it very bluntly, that if depending on where you are Googling from and the kinds of things that Google knows about your interests, when you type in climate change is, the automated answer that may do the autocomplete for you may be a hoax. And that's not a function of what the truth is about climate change, but about what Google, the algorithms that run Google, know about you. And this brings me, again, very quickly to another point, you know, talking about what to do. I know that we live in a society that's on principle averse to regulations in these areas, but the standard get out of jail free card that these types of, in particular, social media companies are using, free speech, First Amendment rights, is a decoy. It's a smoke screen. It's not about, it cannot be about free speech when their algorithms are promoting bullshit, disinformation, manipulative stuff. It's not, that's not free speech. That's actually coming down, you know, putting your thumb on the scale of free speech when you allow your algorithms to determine how much traffic a certain piece of misinformation is going to get. So should social media platforms, just as an example, be regulated, be responsible for the stuff that, not the stuff that people put in there, but the stuff that their algorithms promote? That seems like a good start to me.
I want to relate or kind of connect this last point to what Eva said earlier about the internet as a form of public service and a public utility, because that's exactly what it is. It's a public utility that we should be regulating, and it should be, in a way, collectively owned. But again, this is a topic for another conversation. But I just wanted to say how happy I am to see a librarian in the room, because I know you're the people that are at the forefront of fighting disinformation, misinformation, and promoting informational literacy and even technological literacy in this case, which is so important nowadays, because I heard a while ago that techno-optimism, or this blind idea that technology is going to save us and all that, is directly proportional to information literacy. The more literacy you have about questions around information and technology, the less likely you are to buy into this AI hype that we're witnessing. So thank you for everything you're doing for our students, really the future of this country. And so I wanted to add to your important point that even if we were to focus on the big five in technology, Google, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and so on, we would still be missing a very important part of the information ecosystem nowadays, which is these much less known companies that even though we may never have heard of them, wield such enormous power in the information ecosystem. And so I wanted to mention the important work of another librarian, Sarah Lambdin, who just this past December published a book called Data Cartels. And this is a very important work that shines light not just on these customer-facing companies that we've all heard of and are aware of, but also these lesser-known actors that do have enormous power because they're aggregating data from all these different sources. And I'm talking specifically about something that libraries are dealing with on a daily basis, which are these two huge conglomerates, RELX and Thomson Reuters, that pretty much every library in the country that is affiliated with a university has to deal with, because they're the sole sources of these important case law databases like LexisNexis and Westlaw. So this is the one side that we do know as members of academia, but the lesser known side of their dealings is that throughout the years they've acquired hundreds of companies that are public data records companies, also data trackers online, third-party cookies, and all that, which is a lot of, I think, something to the tune of 78 records that they have about people in the United States, that these companies then bundle neatly in this new form of information sales, which Sarah Lambdin refers to as the wholesale model of data, which is you walk into this one-stop shop company and their website offers you, if you're an investigator, if you're law enforcement agency, or even, you know, individuals like everyday people like us, for the right price, you can buy unfathomable amounts of data about any single person in this country. And it's really scary, and it's something that we don't talk enough about because we're so focused on the big five.
Or Chinese spying.
Exactly.
Okay, we got the last question.
Want to be the last question? Thank you. I thank you all for your. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you all. I wanted to speak to Yasmina's last point, specifically about small companies, but I actually kind of wanted to flip it and smaller relative to the big five. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And I'm a Spanish professor at UB, so we're all. One thing that I wondered if you could help me talk about the role of not just profit, but the fact that the state has created itself as a kind of like technocratic mediator between this profit situation. It's not always consistent, right? And situations where the state cannot enter, will not enter for other reasons, but an app or a software company or startup is completely willing to enter. And I'm wondering if there's a way to mediate this hunger, because this is part of what's governing this, at least in South America, right? It's a private app that collects biometric information. It's a private app that collects your bus information. You cannot access, what did I say? You can't access the bus information for my son here in Buffalo without having a third-party app. I can't go on a website. So I guess I'm trying to, sorry if this is an elementary question, I'll end there, to thread the needle between what the fact that we have a continuously sort of little by little, like decomposing state in certain ways, and what that hunger does to actually information. I'm not trying to say that there's a pure information, but there's a kind of a hypothetical pre-state information that people are negotiating, and these app companies go right in. So if we could start talking about not just only profit, but the fact that the state and politics has transformed information, like the administrative creep in the university holds nothing with respect to the profit margin. There's no profit being exchanged. It's just, so I don't know. I'm trying to figure out, and from a third world studies perspective, and I use that term specifically, it's intriguing to me. So I wonder if you could address that. Sorry. I wish I had more.
This is plenty, and it's certainly tremendously important. And so I just wanted to mention that I used to think, especially back with Edward Snowden and all that the NSA is probably the one entity in this country that knows the most about us. Well, that's not the case anymore, particularly these two companies that I mentioned. They have turned law enforcement agencies and the government in general into their customer, you know? So now we're in a situation where the law enforcement actually knows less about you than these conglomerates that operate as a data monopoly, a data cartel, as Lambda calls them, and are able to sell this data to the highest bidder. And so I also wanted to point out that Lambda in that same book talks about how the government has been very selective, and this is not something new, in the decisions made as to which cartels to break up, which monopolies to interfere in, and which monopolies to just let go, and sort of let operate as they want. And unfortunately, in this case, it's very much the case that the government simply does not want to interfere. And there's many reasons for that. And I think one of the primary ones is lobbying. It's just good old lobbying. These companies, and I'm not just talking about the big five here, even these lesser known companies that do hold tremendous amounts of data on all of us from 10,000 different sources, if you can imagine that. The government would not interfere, and there is an important reason why they're referred to as a cartel, which is, even though they're de facto competitors, they do have this what Lambda calls collective voice. Whenever there's a government overreach that is being perceived by one part of this ecosystem, the rest of the ecosystem rises together and says, hey, this is wrong. The government wants to regulate us, and we're a free market economy. How is this possible? So basically, I am fully on board with what you said. It's really scary, the amount of the lack of oversight, really, that is happening. And this is intentional, unfortunately.
And it goes a little bit further because, I mean, when I talked about briefly government by algorithm, we have incredible and haphazard implementation of this third-party private technologies in the governing practices. And so it's a kind of vicious and ironic circle that we are calling for more political overview of private companies by the entities that buys those products, like automating welfare, for example, so government cannot police itself, so to speak. So here is another ambitious feedback loop.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for your patience. This has run a little longer than we expected, but I think it's fully justified, if I may say so. To close the panel, I'd like to try something I like to do, which is give everyone a chance to, if you were to recommend a book for everyone to read, which book would that be? And I'll start with Maria Reza's How to Stand Up to a Dictator.
I think I gave my vote already, but please support our librarians. Read Data Cartels.
I would suggest Race After Technology by Bruja Benjamin, in which she argues that race is a technology, no high-tech technology, but a technology. And it's really a great book, readable.
I would recommend The Age of Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff.
I would probably go to Math Destruction, just as a simple way to
Yeah.
get involved.
That's great. All right. Thank you, everyone.